So, some Wild Druid players seem to think that you can't play an effective Wild Druid without building your entire character around Wild Shape. I could do an entire video about why I think that is completely not true, but I think I'm going to show you rather than tell you with today's teamwork build. Let's get into it. So first up, our ancestry for this build is going to be the new Nagaji. That's right, snake people. And for our heritage, we're going to go with the sacred Nagaji. This will give us a tail unarmed attack that deals 1d6 bludgeoning damage and has the finesse and unarmed traits. But that's not really important for this build. What is important about this build, however, is the +2 bonus to fortitude or reflex DCs against grapple or trip attempts. And this also applies to any effect that would grab, restrain, or knock you prone. You'd be surprised how many GMs actually want to trip the big animal. So this will help a lot when we're in Wild Shape. For our background here, you can pretty much go with any background as long as you get the stats you need. And of course, we are building a Wild Order Druid. This will give us the Wild Shape feat, which I'll cover when I get to feats, and the Wild Morph Order spell. This will allow us to take on some of the characteristics of our Wild Shape forms without actually going into full Wild Shape. This is for those situations where we want some aspect of our Wild Shape form, but we don't want to go fully into Wild Shape, so we can cast spells. The starting stats for this build should be Strength 14, Dexterity 14, Constitution 10, Intelligence 10, Wisdom 18, and Charisma 12. Of course, as a Wild Druid, the first feat we get is the Wild Shape feat. This will give us the Wild Shape Order spell. With that spell, we can transform into anything listed under Pest form for 10 minutes. All other Wild Shape forms last for 1 minute. When you choose your own attack modifier instead of the form's default modifier, you gain a +2 bonus on attack rolls. We are going to take some feats that are going to expand this. However, we're not going to be focusing just on Wild Shape. We've got a few other things we can do with this build. Moving on, our first ancestry feat for this build is going to be Serpent's Tongue. This will give us imprecise scent out to a range of 30 feet. Thus, we no longer have to rely on the scent that we get from our Wild Shape forms in order to track people. For spells, I think I'm going to save that for the teamwork reports, and I'm only going to cover a few, because my last build ended up being pretty long, and you guys didn't seem to like that very much. At level 2, it's time for Order Explorer for the Animal Order. We need an animal companion for a flanking partner when we're in Wild Shape, and for a protector when we're casting spells. We could take the Beastmaster dedication for this, but I'm going to go a different route. Speaking of free archetype, I am going to be taking the Scout dedication as our first dedication. We're going to end up pretty stealthy in this build, so being able to scout ahead is always good. And this will give us the Scout's Warning Ranger feat, which will allow us to give all of our allies a +1 circumstance bonus on their initiative. Also, if we use the Scout Exploration activity, we can give our allies a +2 bonus instead of a +1. We also will want to pick up Intimidating Glare as one of our skill feats eventually. I took it here, but you can take it whenever you want. For general feats, you want to take the 3 feats I always take for every build, which are, of course, Toughness, Die Hard, and Canny Acumen, this time for our Fortitude saves. Then you'll want to pick up Incredible Initiative and Fleet. Then, for level 4, I've gone with Mature Animal Companion. This is just bigger, stronger Animal Companion. That's pretty much it. Then for the free archetype, we're going to take Terrain Scouts. This will give us the Terrain Stalker feat twice, choosing a different terrain each time. Thus, we can move through that type of terrain stealthily without making a stealth check, as long as we move only 5 feet and don't come within 10 feet of an enemy. If you use the Avoid Notice Exploration activity and your allies follow the experts to follow you as you do so, you can choose one ally to gain the benefits of any one Terrain Stalker feat you have. This is for that champion that isn't very good at stealth. Okay, moving on to ability score increases. At level 5, 10, and 15, you'll want to increase your strength, dex, wisdom, and charisma. Then, for our ancestry feat at level 5, we're going to take hypnotic lore. For 2 actions, we can force a creature within 30 feet to make a will save against our spell DC. On a successful saving throw, nothing happens. They're unaffected. However, on a failure, the target must spend its first action to approach you. It can't delay or take reactions until it has done so. On a critical failure, the target must use all of its actions to approach you. It can't delay or take reactions until it has reached a space that is adjacent to you, or as close as possible if it reaches some kind of barrier. Remember, we can use this while in wild shape, because it's a visual thing, not an auditory thing, and that's going to be a theme here. Alright, at level 6, it's time for our first wild shape feat. I went with insect shape. Not going to go into too much detail on these because it's fairly simple. We can now transform it into large insects using our focus points instead of spell slots. Then it's Fleeting Shadow. For 2 actions, we can hide and then sneak twice. We still have to meet all the prerequisites for these actions, but it's still a good thing to do during combat, when we can. For level 8, I know all you guys are expecting Ferocious Shape here, but no. We're going to be taking Eerie Environs. Now we can demoralize without losing our hidden condition, and we don't take a penalty for them not understanding our language. This is for when we can sneak up on a foe and we haven't wild shaped yet. And for scaring people when we're not in combat as well. Then it's time for Scout Speed. We gain a 10-foot status bonus to our speed. When calculating our travel speed, this increases to a plus 20-foot status bonus. This is just extra speed for when we're in wild shape and when we're out of wild shape. Then for our 9th level ancestry feat, we're going to pick up Envenom Strike. Once per 10 minutes, for 1 action, we can spit venom onto our weapon or the weapon of a willing ally within 30 feet. If the next strike with that weapon before the start of your next turn hits, it deals an extra 2d6 poison damage. Again, this is something we can do while we're in wild shape. It isn't a spell, it isn't a manipulate action, and it's not speaking. Unfortunately, we won't be able to use this on our wild shapes unarmed attacks, because they're not weapons. But what we can do is use it on the weapon of an ally, and that can help some classes out a lot. At level 10, it's time for another wild shape feat with Soaring Shape. We need this for what's going to be our best wild shape feats, and we need to be able to fly anyway, because we don't want to have to cast spells at flying enemies. Then, for the free archetype, we're going to take Scout's Pounce. We can stride up to our speed, and then strike twice for 2 actions. If we were hidden or undetected, the foe is flat-footed against both attacks. Multiple attack penalty applies normally. We'll mostly want to use this one for when we can't wild shape. Maybe we're out of focus points or we just don't have the spells prepared that we need. Either way, this is a good way to get some damage in when we don't want to wild shape or can't. For today's first teamwork report, the first thing I want to talk about is form control, and by extension, perfect form control. A lot of you may be asking, why haven't I taken form control yet? And the answer is simple. I'm not going to. Why is that? Well, put simply, I have played 3 different Wild Druids with 3 very different GMs, and I've never used it. The first 2 times that I played a Wild Druid, I was like some of you. I thought I needed to take form control, just in case. I understand, in theory, why you want to take form control, just in case you need to stay in a battle form for longer than the spell lasts. However, in practice, I never used it. It just sat there as a useless feat. So much so that I ended up retraining it into something else both times. For spells other than wild shape spells, you want to focus on spells that can be sustained, because we can sustain spells while in wild shape. In this build, most of the time we're not going to want to go into Wild Shape immediately. Instead, we'll want to cast spells that either last a long time or ones that we can sustain, and then go into Wild Shape. At this level, Goblin Pox is a great example. For 2 actions, we can touch a creature and force it to make a Fortitude saving throw. If they critically succeed, nothing happens. On a successful saving throw, the target is sickened 1. On a failure, the target is inflicted with Goblin Pox at stage 1, which is still just sickened, but they can go into stage 2, and maybe even stage 3. On a critical failure, the target is inflicted with Goblin Pox at stage 2, which is sickened 1 and slowed 1 for 1 round. Stage 3 really doesn't matter here because that's going to take 1 day to go off. Chameleon Coat is also a great spell for this build, but this one is more for out of combat. For 3 actions, we can target up to 8 creatures within 15 feet of us. For 10 minutes, those creatures get a +3 bonus to stealth checks to hide. This is great for anyone wearing heavy armor that isn't exactly good at stealth, including champions. Okay, at 12th level, it's time for Dragon Shape. Come on, you knew this one was coming. Transforming into a dragon is so cool, so yeah, we want to take this. Then on the free archetype side, we'll take Camouflage. So now, as long as we're in natural terrain, we can hide and sneak without cover or being concealed, which is very nice for this build. At level 13, it's time for Pit of Snakes. This is essentially Black Tentacles once per day. So cast this before you Wild Shape to take weaker enemies out of the fight. It does have the Manipulate trait, so we need to do this before we Wild Shape. Then at level 14, it's time for Incredible Companion. Just a stronger animal companion. Pretty basic. Then we'll need to take our second dedication, the Martial dedication. Yeah, I know, I screwed up on the general feats. We need to take weapon proficiency before this, so we can be trained in martial weapons, so we can actually take this. We won't be using martial weapons, but we will need to be trained in them to take this dedication. If we're not an expert in intimidation by this point, we are now. We also get a 10-foot emanation Marshal's aura that gives all of our allies a +1 status bonus to saves against fear. And this is up when we're in Wild Shape. And it is a status bonus, so we can adjust our Wild Shape form's stats with this. At level 16, it's time for Specialized Companion. And the specialization we want to go with here is the Ambusher specialization. After all, we do want our animal companion to be good at stealth just like us. Then it's time for Dread Martial Stance. To enter this stance, we must make an intimidation check. This is why we need Intimidating Glare, so we can actually make the intimidation check while in Wild Shape. On a critical success, our martial aura increases to 20-foot emanation. It also grants our allies a status bonus to their damage rolls equal to the number of weapon damage dice of the weapon or unarmed attack they are using. Also, when we or an ally within our Marshal's Aura critically hit a foe within our Marshal's Aura, that foe becomes frightened 1. On a success, we gain all the effects of critical success except our Marshal's Aura does not increase. On a failure, we do not enter the stance. And on a critical failure, we don't enter the stance, and we can't do so for 1 minute. Remember, we can enter the stance while we're in Wild Shape, and it is a status bonus, so we can gain that extra damage while in Wild Shape as well. At level 17, it's time for our last Ancestry feat, and we're going to go with Prismatic Scales. This will allow us to cast Prismatic Armor as an Occult Innate spell once per day. This spell gives us resistance to basically all elements. At level 18, it's time for Primal Aegis. We and all of our allies within 30 feet of us gain resistance equal to our Wisdom modifier to Acid, Cold, Electricity, Fire, negative, and positive damage. We're taking this for 2 reasons. The first is to help our allies by giving them resistance to even more things than Prismatic Scales gives us. And the second reason is, number 1, we can only cast Prismatic Scales once a day, and it doesn't give us resistance to negative damage. The resistances that overlap won't stack, but each of these does give us resistance to something that the other does not. Then on the free archetype side, it's Topple Foe. When an ally hits with a melee strike against a foe that both of you are adjacent to, you can use a reaction to attempt to trip that foe. And our wild shape forms do give us a pretty good athletics modifier, even if we aren't expert or master or legendary in athletics. Granted, we will want to, because then our athletics check will be higher, but the point is, we can still trip in wild shape. And then we come to level 20. For our ability scores at this level, we'll want to increase our strength, dex, con, and wisdom, since increasing our charisma won't really do anything. And we certainly don't need intelligence for this build. And then it's time to take True Shapeshifter. While under the effects of wild shape, we can transform into any form that is listed on our wild shape list. In addition, we can also transform into a kaiju with the effects of Nature Incarnate. Then our last feat for this build is going to be Coordinated Charge. For 2 actions, we can stride up to our speed and then make a melee strike. If we hit and damage the enemy, then all allies within 60 feet that saw us can use a reaction to stride up to their speed. However, they must end their movement closer to the enemy we hit than they started, if they decide to use the reaction. For our second teamwork report, there is something I forgot to mention in the first teamwork report. The reason I say that form control isn't necessary for this build is number 1, you almost never need to be in a battle form for more than a minute. And you don't need to be in pest form for more than 10 minutes. But you may be asking, what about out of combat? How are we going to track people? We are beating the stealth modifier that pest form gives us by level 5. Also, we have scent from level 1, and that's base before we even wild shape. So no, we do not need to wild shape to track people. But anyway, at this level we now have all of our martial stuff. And every single martial ability we have, we can use while in wild shape. They aren't spells, they're not manipulate actions, and they most certainly do not require us to speak. And our martial aura is always active, even when we're in wild shape. For spells, Tangling Creepers and Mask of Terror are both great spells that we can use even when we're in wild shape. Tangling Creepers slows enemies down and can pull nearby enemies into it, and Mask of Terror can help protect allies. Granted, we must cast both of these spells before we wild shape, but as I said before, we don't need to wild shape immediately with this build. Alright, you know the deal. Like, subscribe, ding the bell if you enjoyed the video. And if you really enjoyed the video, you can check out the Patreon page for even more videos like this. And if you want some tips for how to play any druid, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, teamwork is vital.